I'm Rachel, 32 years old, standing in the glittering ballroom at my sister Sophia's lavish wedding. During the toast, my mother Eleanor stands, champagne flute raised high. To the daughter I've always been proud of, she begins. Everyone expects the typical mother of the bride speech, but she continues, and to finally revealing that Sophia has been secretly sabotaging Rachel's career and relationships for years. My champagne glass shatters as it slips from my fingers. The guests freeze in stunned silence. I look at Sophia, and in her eyes I see it. Guilt. This is the moment I begin to uncover the extent of my sister's betrayal and plan the perfect revenge. Before I dive into how my entire family imploded that night, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If my shattered champagne glass caught your attention, please hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey from betrayal to justice. Trust me, what my mother revealed at that wedding reception was just the tip of the iceberg in this family revenge drama. Ready to hear how I discovered the truth about the sister I thought I knew? Let's continue. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of my perfect, younger sister Sophia. She was always the star of the family, while I was the responsible, hard-working one who somehow never quite measured up. Our childhood home in suburban Connecticut was filled with Sophia's trophies and achievement certificates, while my own accomplishments seemed to blend into the background like wallpaper. Rachel, why can't you be more outgoing like your sister? My mother would ask when I preferred studying to socializing. Rachel, Sophia got straight, as without even trying. Maybe you should ask her for help with your study habits, was another favorite, even though I was making the dean's list at my university. When I was accepted to medical school, my parents hosted a small dinner at home. When Sophia landed her first marketing job after college, they threw her a party at the country club with 50 guests. The contrast wasn't subtle. You're imagining things, my therapist, Dr. Bennett, suggested during one of our sessions 3 months before the wedding. Sibling rivalry is normal, but you've built a successful career as a neurologist. Do you really think your parents don't value that? I remember sighing, staring out her office window at the Boston skyline. It's not that they don't value it. It's that nothing I do ever seems quite good enough compared to whatever Sophia does. Despite these feelings, I always tried to maintain a good relationship with my sister. We had Sunday brunches when our schedules allowed, exchanged birthday gifts, and called each other for advice. On the surface, we were close. I genuinely celebrated her successes and believed she did the same for mine. That's why the past year had been so confusing. It started with small things. A promotion at the hospital that suddenly fell through after the board received concerning information about my professional conduct. My engagement to Nathan ending abruptly when he confessed to having doubts, but couldn't articulate what they were. The mysterious flooding in my apartment that destroyed many of my possessions and forced me to temporarily move in with my grandmother Martha while repairs were being made. Through it all, Sophia had been outwardly supportive. "You're too good for that hospital anyway," she'd said about the lost promotion. Nathan clearly wasn't the one, she consoled after my engagement ended. "Stay with me instead of Grandma Martha," she'd offered after the flooding, though I declined because her downtown loft was too far from the hospital. I threw myself into helping plan Sophia's wedding to James Hamilton, heir to the Hamilton real estate empire. I was happy for her, truly. James seemed kind and grounded despite his family wealth, and he appeared to genuinely adore my sister. Planning their wedding gave me something positive to focus on while my own life seemed to be falling apart. The engagement party at the Hamilton estate was the first time I noticed something odd. I overheard Sophia on the phone in the library, her voice hushed but intense. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. "Just stick to the plan. It's almost done." When she saw me in the doorway, she quickly ended the call and flashed her perfect smile. "Just talking to the florist," she explained. "They're being difficult about the imported orchids." I nodded and pushed aside my suspicions. Wedding planning was stressful, and Sophia had always been a perfectionist. If she was being secretive about some detail of her big day, it was probably just to maintain the element of surprise. A week before the wedding, I overheard another call while helping Sophia with final dress alterations at our parents' house. She'll be there, but she won't be a problem, Sophia was saying from behind the partially closed bathroom door. Mom's on board with everything. Yes, even that part. When I asked her about it later, she waved dismissively. Just wedding jitters making me crazy. The coordinator keeps asking the same questions over and over. I didn't press further. After all, this was her moment, and I didn't want my own insecurities to cast a shadow over her happiness. I dismissed my growing unease as a combination of stress, jealousy, and my recent streak of bad luck. My grandmother Martha, however, seemed to share my subconscious concerns. During a dinner at her cozy Cambridge apartment 2 nights before the wedding, she studied me carefully over her reading glasses. "Rachel, darling," she said, putting down her fork, "has Sophia always been kind to you? Truly kind, I mean." The question caught me off guard. "Of course, Grandma. We have our moments like all sisters, but she's always been there for me." Martha pursed her lips, the fine lines around her mouth deepening. "I've watched that girl her whole life. There's something not quite right there. Your mother doesn't see it, and your father chooses not to. But I see how she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching." "What do you mean?" I asked, suddenly uncomfortable. "Like you have something she wants," Martha replied. "Or like she's already taken it." I laughed it off, attributing my grandmother's concerns to her tendency toward dramatic observations. Martha had always been the family truth-teller, sometimes to a fault. But her words stayed with me, a tiny seed of doubt planted in fertile ground. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at the Preston Hotel's ballroom, I watched Sophia work the room with effortless charm. My parents beamed with pride, my father Philip's arm draped around my mother's shoulders as they accepted congratulations on raising such a beautiful, successful daughter about to make a perfect match. I was seated between James's college roommate and his elderly aunt, nursing a glass of wine and forcing smiles. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom and nearly collided with Nathan in the hallway. "Rachel," he said, looking startled. "I didn't know you'd be here." "I'm the sister of the bride," I replied coolly. "The better question is, why are you here? I didn't realize you and James were friends." Nathan shifted uncomfortably. "We're not really. Sophia invited me. As a +1 for someone who couldn't make it last minute." Before I could respond, Sophia appeared, sliding her arm through Nathan's with familiar ease. "There you are." "Oh, Rachel, I see you found Nathan. Wasn't it sweet of him to fill in?" Jessica's grandmother had that fall, and we had an empty seat at table 7. She smiled brightly. "Everyone important should be here for my special weekend, don't you think?" Something in the way they stood together sent a chill through me. Nathan couldn't meet my eyes, and Sophia's smile didn't quite reach hers. But once again, I pushed the feeling aside. Tomorrow was her wedding day, and I was determined to be the supportive sister she needed me to be. If only I'd known then what my mother would reveal at the reception, perhaps I could have prepared myself for the destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family. The morning of Sophia's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day that seemed tailor-made for a fairy tale ceremony. I arrived at the bridal suite of the Hamilton estate at 7 a.m. sharp, armed with coffee and breakfast pastries for the bridal party. "Thank God, caffeine," Sophia said, grabbing the largest cup from the tray. She was already in her silk robe, hair in rollers, looking fresh despite the early hour. "The makeup artist is running late, and Mom's already called twice in a panic about the flower girl's sash." I set down the breakfast spread and began organizing the jewelry and accessories for the bridesmaids. Despite being Sophia's only sister, I wasn't the maid of honor. That role had gone to Amber, her college roommate. I'd been hurt when she told me, but Sophia had smoothed it over by saying she needed me in a more important role, coordinating everything behind the scenes. The morning progressed with the controlled chaos typical of wedding days. Sophia became increasingly snippy as the ceremony time approached, barking orders at her bridesmaids and criticizing everything from the way the hairstylist was curling Amber's hair to the shade of lipstick the makeup artist had selected. "Not that one, Rachel," she snapped when I handed her the pearl earrings our grandmother had given her. "I'm wearing the diamond drops James gave me." The pearls look so matronly. I bit my tongue and exchanged them without comment. The pearls had been meant as her something old, a family tradition, but it was her day. Surprisingly, just before it was time to get dressed, Sophia pulled me aside into the small, adjoining room away from the chattering bridesmaids. "I just wanted a moment with just us," she said, suddenly seeming vulnerable. "Despite everything, you're my big sister. I wouldn't be who I am without you." For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and I felt a rush of affection. I hugged her carefully, mindful of her hair and makeup. "I'm so happy for you, Soph," I said sincerely. "James is a lucky man." She pulled back and studied my face for a moment, an unreadable expression crossing her features. "You always were the good one, Rachel," she said softly. "Too good, maybe." Before I could ask what she meant, Eleanor burst into the room announcing it was time for the dress, and the moment was gone. The ceremony itself was stunning, with 300 guests filling the rose garden of the historic Hamilton estate. White chairs lined the immaculate lawn, and an arbor draped with cascading flowers framed the spot where Sophia and James would exchange vows. I stood with my parents near the front, watching my sister glide down the aisle on her father's arm, looking like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. As James recited his heartfelt vows, I noticed Nathan sitting about halfway back on the groom's side. Our eyes met briefly, and he quickly looked away. What was he doing on the groom's side? Sophia had said he was filling in for a friend of hers. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour on the terrace, I observed several strange interactions. Nathan seemed unusually comfortable with James's friends, laughing and chatting as if he'd known them for years. Sophia, making her rounds through the crowd, stopped to speak with him for longer than seemed appropriate for a casual acquaintance. At one point, I saw them share a private laugh, his hand briefly touching her waist in a gesture that seemed too intimate. I was distracted from these observations when Eleanor cornered me by the champagne fountain, her third glass in hand. "You look nice, Rachel," she said, adjusting my bridesmaid's dress strap with critical fingers. "Though a bit more makeup wouldn't have hurt. Those dark circles make you look tired." "Thanks, Mom," I replied drily. "Long shifts at the hospital will do that." She sighed. "Such a demanding career. I still think you would have been happier in dermatology. Regular hours, better pay." I took a long sip of champagne rather than responding. This was an old argument, and today wasn't the day to rehash it. "Will you be saying anything during the toasts?" she asked suddenly. "No. Amber's giving the maid of honor speech. I wasn't asked to prepare anything." Eleanor frowned slightly. "That's not right. You should say something. You're her sister." "It's fine, Mom. It's her wedding, her choice." "Well, I'll be sure to mention you in my toast," she said, patting my arm. There was something odd in her expression, a tension around her eyes that didn't match her smile. The reception was held in the estate's grand ballroom, a magnificent space with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens. Dinner was served, the cake was cut, and finally, it was time for the toasts. James's best man went first with a charming, funny speech about their friendship. Amber followed with an emotional tribute to Sophia, highlighting her generosity and loyalty in ways that made me wonder if we were talking about the same person. James's father spoke briefly about welcoming Sophia to the family, and then it was my mother's turn. Eleanor rose gracefully, champagne flute in hand. At 60, she was still striking, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into an elegant updo that matched Sophia's. "When my daughter was born," she began, smiling at Sophia, "I knew she was special." There was a spark in her eyes, a determination that told me she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted in life. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. "To the daughter I've always been proud of," she continued, and I settled in for what I assumed would be several minutes of Sophia adoration. But then my mother did something no one expected. She turned to look directly at me, her expression suddenly serious. And to finally revealing that Sophia has been secretly sabotaging Rachel's career and relationships for years. My champagne glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the table. The entire ballroom fell silent, 300 pairs of eyes darting between me, my mother, and Sophia at the head table. "What?" James said, turning to his new wife with confusion. Sophia's face had drained of color. "Mom's had too much champagne," she said with a forced laugh. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Eleanor wasn't finished. "I found the emails, Sophia. The ones to the hospital board member you were dating, spreading lies about Rachel's competence. I know you deliberately pursued Nathan to test his loyalty to your sister. I've seen the receipts for the plumber you hired to tamper with Rachel's apartment pipes." Gasps and murmurs spread through the ballroom. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. "For years," my mother continued, her voice breaking, "I turned a blind eye because I thought you needed extra attention. But watching you plan this wedding while continuing to undermine your sister at every turn, I can't stay silent anymore." Sophia stood up, so quickly her chair toppled backward. "This is insane. Mom is clearly having some kind of episode. Dad, do something." My father looked shell-shocked, his mouth opening and closing without words coming out. I finally found my voice. "Is it true?" I asked Sophia directly. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be ridiculous. Mom's jealous that all the attention is on me today. She's making this up." But I could see it in her face. The flash of calculation, the lack of genuine outrage. In that moment, I knew my mother was telling the truth. Without another word, I stood and walked out of the ballroom, my legs carrying me automatically through the French doors and into the garden beyond. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting, Sophia's continued denials, James's confused questions, guests whispering urgently to each other. I found a stone bench hidden behind a hedge of roses and sank onto it, my mind racing to process everything I'd just learned. The promotion, Nathan, my apartment. None of it had been bad luck. It had been Sophia, deliberately sabotaging my life while pretending to support me. "Are you okay?" a voice asked, startling me from my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman about my age with James's dark eyes and strong jawline. His sister Margaret, I realized. We'd met briefly at the engagement party. "Not really," I admitted. She sat beside me, careful to leave appropriate space. I always thought there was something off about Sophia, but James was so in love, he couldn't see it. "You believe what my mother said?" Margaret nodded slowly. "I've seen how Sophia operates. The way she manipulates situations, always coming out looking perfect while others take the fall. She's been doing it with James's friends since they started dating." I wiped away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "I don't understand why. What did I ever do to her?" "Some people can't stand to see others happy," Margaret said simply. "Especially if they think you have something they don't." As we sat in the garden, the sounds of the disrupted reception filtering through the open windows, I made a decision. I would not cause a scene tonight. I would not give Sophia the satisfaction of painting me as the jealous, unstable sister. But I would find out exactly what she had done, gather the evidence, and make sure she faced consequences for her actions. Little did I know then just how deep the betrayal went, or how it would ultimately transform not just my relationship with Sophia, but my understanding of our entire family. If you're feeling that familiar sting of betrayal from someone you trusted with your whole heart, know you're not alone. My heart was racing just as fast as yours might be right now. If you're invested in finding out exactly how deep Sophia's betrayal went and what happened next, hit that like button to let me know. The evidence I was about to uncover would shake my family to its core. The days following Sophia's wedding were a blur of confusion, anger, and determination. I checked into a hotel that night, unable to face returning to my parents' house where I'd been staying while my apartment was being repaired. The next morning, I called my grandmother Martha. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said when she answered. "Come stay with me. Your old room is ready." Martha lived in a charming Victorian house in Cambridge, close enough to the hospital where I worked, but far enough from my immediate family to give me space to think. When I arrived, dragging my suitcase up her front steps, she opened the door before I could knock. "I always knew that girl wasn't right," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and home-baked cookies. Your mother finally did something decent, though her timing could have been better. Inside, over tea and Martha's famous shortbread, I learned that the wedding reception had descended into chaos after I left. Sophia had managed to convince many guests that Eleanor was having some kind of breakdown, possibly early-onset dementia. James had looked stunned throughout, but stood by his new wife. They had left for their honeymoon to the Maldives as scheduled the next morning, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. "Your father called this morning," Martha told me, refilling my teacup. "He's trying to smooth things over, says your mother was stressed and misspoke." "Do you think that's true?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Martha snorted. "Eleanor has many faults, but confusion isn't one of them. If she said what she said, she had her reasons." My phone had been buzzing constantly with texts and calls from extended family and friends who had been at the wedding. I ignored most of them, responding only to Dr. Patel, my direct supervisor at the hospital, to request a few personal days. "Take the week," he said kindly. "And Rachel, for what it's worth, I never believed those rumors about you. Your work speaks for itself." Those words strengthened my resolve. I needed to understand exactly what Sophia had done, and I needed evidence to back it up. If my mother was right, and my gut told me she was, then Sophia had been systematically undermining me for years while pretending to be my supportive sister. Margaret Hamilton, James's sister, proved to be an unexpected ally in my investigation. She texted me the day after the wedding. "If you want to know more about what your sister's been up to, I have some information that might help. Coffee tomorrow." We met at a quiet cafe near Harvard Square. Margaret was dressed in a simple linen dress, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. A stark contrast to Sophia's always perfect appearance. "James doesn't know I'm meeting you," she said after we'd exchanged brief greetings. "He's furious with your mother for ruining the wedding, but I think he's also scared there might be truth to what she said." "What do you know?" I asked directly. Margaret pulled out her tablet. "Sophia left this at our family lake house last month. She asked me to ship it to her, but I took a look first because I've been worried about James." She never logged out of her accounts. What Margaret showed me was the first piece of hard evidence, a secret email account Sophia had been using, separate from her regular personal and work emails. The account contained communications that made my blood run cold. There were emails between Sophia and Dr. Lawrence Farrow, a member of the hospital board whom I knew she had briefly dated. In them, she systematically fed him information questioning my professional judgment, even fabricating a story about me misdiagnosing a patient, which could have been career-ending had it been believed. "The board didn't take action because your record was too strong and another doctor vouched for you," Margaret explained. "But it was enough to kill your promotion." There were messages with Nathan dating back to before our engagement ended, showing Sophia had deliberately pursued him, using information about our relationship's weak points to drive a wedge between us. "Test her," one message read. "If she really loved you, wouldn't she make more time for you despite her schedule? I make time for the people I care about, no matter how busy I am." Photos documented Sophia's involvement in my apartment disaster. Receipts for a plumbing consultation at my address when I should have been at work, followed by an invoice for repairs to her own bathroom dated the same day. Most disturbing were bank statements showing small but regular withdrawals from a joint account our parents had set up for us years ago. I had forgotten the account existed, rarely using it, but apparently Sophia had been helping herself to my share for years. "There's more," Margaret said, scrolling further. "She's been doing similar things to some of James's friends who she thought were a bad influence on him. And she's been collecting information on his family business." That's what first made me suspicious. I felt physically ill looking at the evidence of my sister's systematic betrayal. "I need copies of everything," I said. Margaret nodded. "I've already backed it up. But Rachel, be careful. From what I've seen, Sophia is calculating and has no problem hurting people who get in her way." Armed with this initial evidence, I began my own methodical investigation. I contacted Nathan, asking to meet in person. He initially refused, but when I mentioned I had seen emails between him and Sophia, He agreed to coffee at a public place. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, looking miserable across the table from me. "Sophia kept saying you were probably cheating on me because of your long hours at the hospital. She had all these concerns about your commitment. And instead of talking to me about it, you started sleeping with my sister?" I kept my voice steady with effort. Nathan had the grace to look ashamed. "It didn't start physical until after we broke up, but the emotional affair, yes, that started before. She was always there, always sympathetic about how neglected she thought I felt. She made it seem like she was trying to help our relationship, but looking back, she was undermining it from the beginning." "When did it end?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "A few weeks before the wedding," he admitted. "She said we needed to cool things until after she was married." I was actually surprised to be invited to the wedding. "As a +1 for a non-existent friend," I said bitterly. He nodded. "She said it would be a good chance to see you again, maybe reconcile. I realize now she probably wanted to hurt you more by having me there." This conversation confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Sophia's sabotage went beyond just a few isolated incidents. It was a pattern that had likely affected more areas of my life than I yet realized. I dug deeper, reaching out to former boyfriends under the pretense of closure conversations. 2 of them revealed similar stories. Sophia had inserted herself into our relationships, always appearing supportive while subtly planting seeds of doubt. At the hospital, I had a frank conversation with Dr. Patel about the rumors that had cost me my promotion. He confirmed that the source had been traced back to Dr. Farrow, who had since left the board under unclear circumstances. "We discovered some inconsistencies in his claims," Dr. Patel explained carefully. "That's why we didn't take more severe action against you. But the damage to your reputation was already done." I also learned that James had been completely in the dark about Sophia's actions. Margaret stayed in touch, reporting that her brother was struggling to reconcile the woman he had married with the person described in Eleanor's toast. "He called from the Maldives," Margaret told me during one of our now regular coffee meetings. "He said Sophia's been on her phone constantly, seems preoccupied. When he asked about what happened at the wedding, she broke down crying, saying your family has always been jealous of her success, and your mother is mentally unstable." "And he believes her?" I asked. Margaret sighed.
"He wants to.
But I think he's starting to have doubts. Especially after I asked him some pointed questions about whether she's ever tried to distance him from friends or family she doesn't approve of." As I gathered evidence and pieced together the extent of Sophia's manipulation, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted immediate, public revenge, to expose her to everyone the way she had been exposed at the wedding. But another part, the doctor in me perhaps, wanted to understand why. What would drive my sister to such calculated cruelty against someone who had only ever supported her? My therapy sessions with Dr. Bennett intensified during this period. "What you're describing sounds like more than simple sibling rivalry," she observed during one particularly difficult session. "What does it sound like to you?" I asked, exhausted from another night of broken sleep. "Without meeting Sophia, I can't make any diagnosis, but the patterns you're describing, the manipulation, lack of empathy, calculated social climbing, and systematic undermining of perceived rivals, these are consistent with certain personality disorders." "So, my sister is basically a sociopath." The word felt extreme, even given what I now knew. "I didn't say that," Dr. Bennett cautioned. "But I do think understanding the psychological underpinnings might help you process this betrayal and decide how to move forward." Moving forward. That was the question that kept me awake at night. What did moving forward look like after discovering your sister had been actively trying to ruin your life while pretending to love you? Did I want justice, revenge, or simply to understand why? As July turned to August, and Sophia and James returned from their honeymoon to set up house in their new Beacon Hill brownstone, I continued my quiet investigation, building a comprehensive file of evidence. I was determined that when I finally confronted my sister, she would have no room to deny or manipulate her way out of the truth. What I didn't yet realize was that the roots of Sophia's behavior went much deeper than I imagined. into the very foundation of our family structure and the secrets our parents had kept for decades. By mid-August, I had amassed substantial evidence of Sophia's systematic sabotage of my life, but I still didn't understand why. What would drive my sister to such calculated cruelty? To answer this question, I began researching family dynamics and personality disorders, spending hours in the medical library at the hospital during my breaks. I read about narcissistic family systems, where one child is elevated to golden status while another becomes the scapegoat. I learned about traits like pathological envy and lack of empathy that could explain Sophia's ability to hurt me while maintaining a perfect facade. But these clinical explanations, while informative, felt incomplete. There had to be more to the story. My grandmother Martha became my confidant during this time, our evening conversations on her wraparound porch stretching late into the night. One such evening, as cicadas hummed in the garden and the August heat finally began to relent, Martha shared insights that would begin to unravel the mystery. "Your mother and her sister had a similar relationship, you know," she said, rocking gently in her wicker chair. "Eleanor was always jealous of Vivian, though she hid it better than Sophia does." This was news to me. "Mom has a sister? She's never mentioned her." Martha's eyes widened slightly. "You didn't know about Vivian? They haven't spoken in nearly 40 years. Not since before you were born. I assumed you knew." "What happened between them?" Martha sighed deeply. "Eleanor felt overshadowed by Vivian, who was more academically gifted. When they both fell in love with the same man, your father, and he chose Eleanor, she made sure to rub it in. Then she systematically turned your father against Vivian, claiming she was trying to sabotage their relationship." The parallels were chilling. "Are you saying my mother did to her sister what Sophia has been doing to me?" "History often repeats itself in families," Martha said quietly. "Especially when the underlying issues aren't addressed." This revelation sent me searching through old family albums and videos stored in Martha's attic. What I found was illuminating. Footage from family gatherings showing subtle dynamics I'd never noticed as a child. My mother consistently praising Sophia, while finding small ways to undermine me. Sophia watching and learning, her expression calculating even as a young child. In one particularly telling video from a Christmas when I was about 12 and Sophia 9, I received a science kit I'd been wanting for months. My excitement was obvious as I opened it. The camera then panned to Sophia, who looked directly at our mother with a slight frown. Eleanor immediately called attention to Sophia's gift, a designer dress she hadn't shown much interest in, making everyone admire it while my science kit was set aside, forgotten. "Your mother taught Sophia that getting attention was a zero-sum game," Dr. Bennett observed when I described these discoveries during our session. "If you were receiving positive attention, it meant less for her. So Sophia learned to either redirect attention to herself or, more insidiously, to undermine you so you'd receive negative attention or none at all." Armed with this new understanding, I decided it was time to confront my father. We arranged to meet at a quiet restaurant near his office in downtown Boston, away from my mother's influence. Philip Harris had always been the peacekeeper in our family, a mild-mannered accountant who avoided conflict at all costs. "Dad," I said after we'd ordered, "I need to know the truth about what's been happening in our family, not just with Sophia but going back years." He looked uncomfortable, adjusting his tie nervously. "Your mother was out of line at the wedding, Rachel. She'd had too much champagne and—" "Stop," I interrupted firmly. "I've seen the evidence. Emails, bank statements, conversations with people Sophia manipulated. Mom was telling the truth, and I think you know it." My father's shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked every one of his 65 years. "I didn't know the extent of it," he said quietly. "But yes, I suspected Sophia wasn't always kind to you. Why didn't you ever say anything? Do anything?" He stared into his water glass. "Your mother and I don't always agree on parenting. Eleanor can be forceful in her opinions. It was easier to keep the peace." "Even at the expense of your daughter?" I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. "It's complicated, Rachel." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. "There's something you need to know about Sophia. Something that might explain, though not excuse, some of what's happened. I waited, my heart pounding. Sophia isn't my biological daughter. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. What? Eleanor had an affair, early in our marriage, with my former business partner, Robert Chambers. When she got pregnant, she confessed, but we decided to stay together and raise Sophia as my own. No one else knows except Eleanor's sister Vivian, which is part of why they had their falling out. Does Sophia know?
He shook his head.
We never told her, but Eleanor has always been overprotective of her. Perhaps out of guilt, or fear that Sophia would somehow sense she was different. She compensated by favoring her, and I let it happen. This explained so much: my mother's excessive indulgence of Sophia, the family tension, the sense that different rules applied to us. But it didn't excuse the active sabotage. Dad, whatever her biological origins, Sophia has been deliberately hurting me for years. And Mom and you allowed it. I know, he said, looking genuinely remorseful. I failed you, Rachel. I was so focused on keeping the family together that I didn't protect you the way a father should. As we continued talking, I learned more about the family dysfunction that had shaped us all. My mother's insecurity and guilt had created a toxic environment where Sophia was overindulged and I was expected to understand and accommodate. My father's conflict avoidance had enabled both of them. And I had internalized the message that my needs and feelings mattered, less than keeping the peace. Over the next few weeks, my relationship with Margaret Hamilton deepened as we both worked to understand and document Sophia's patterns of behavior. She shared concerns about James, showing me evidence that Sophia had already begun manipulating him and his family relationships. She's been telling him that his parents are too controlling of the family business, Margaret explained during one of our meetings, and that I've always been jealous of him as the heir apparent. It's causing tension where there wasn't any before. Classic divide and conquer, I noted, recognizing the pattern from my own experience. As I pieced together the complex family dynamics that had enabled Sophia's behavior, I struggled with how to respond. Traditional revenge felt hollow. I didn't want to become like her or perpetuate the cycle of family dysfunction. But I also couldn't allow her to continue harming people without consequences. During an autumn walk through Harvard Yard with Martha, the fallen leaves crunching beneath our feet, my grandmother provided the perspective I needed. Justice isn't about punishment, Rachel, she said, linking her arm through mine. It's about truth and consequences. Sophia has avoided the natural consequences of her actions because they've been hidden. Perhaps the most powerful thing you can do is simply bring everything into the light. This insight shifted my thinking. My goal shouldn't be revenge, but truth, breaking the cycle of secrecy and manipulation that had poisoned our family for generations. With this clarity, I began developing a comprehensive plan that would expose Sophia's actions without destroying lives unnecessarily, including her own. I was no longer the naive sister who had stood shocked at a wedding reception. I was becoming an advocate for truth, determined to end the patterns of dysfunction that had shaped my family for too long. I know that feeling of discovering painful family truths all too well. If you're finding yourself nodding along because you've experienced similar family revelations, you're not alone in this journey. This part of my story was the hardest to share, but seeing your support through your likes and comments has given me strength. If you're invested in seeing how I turned this painful discovery into a plan for truth and healing, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. Family secrets can be devastating, but bringing them into the light is the first step toward healing. By September, I had returned to work at Boston Memorial Hospital, my reputation slowly being restored as the truth about the false allegations came to light. Dr. Farrow had admitted to spreading misinformation about me based on what Sophia had told him, and the hospital board issued a formal apology. The promotion I had lost was offered to me again, and this time I accepted it, becoming the youngest attending neurologist in the department's history. While rebuilding my professional life, I continued methodically documenting everything related to Sophia's deceptions. I created a secure digital archive with folders organized by category: career sabotage, relationship interference, financial theft, and family manipulation. Each incident was backed by emails, text messages, bank statements, or witness testimonies, creating an irrefutable body of evidence. On the surface, I presented a calm, healing facade to my family. I began attending Sunday dinners again at my parents' house, where Sophia and James were often present. I smiled appropriately, asked about their honeymoon, and admired their new home when invited for a housewarming in October. To anyone watching, it would appear I had moved past the wedding incident and was working to repair family relationships. Sophia seemed relieved by my apparent forgiveness, though I caught her watching me carefully when she thought I wasn't looking. During these gatherings, I noticed concerning signs that her marriage was already showing strain. James was often quiet, his easy smile replaced by a thoughtful frown. Sophia dominated conversations, subtly controlling which topics were discussed and frequently speaking for her husband. "James and I think the Hamilton Company should expand internationally," she would say, or, "James and I have decided not to attend his parents' anniversary cruise." Each time, James would give a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself for years. Thanksgiving dinner became a strategic opportunity to observe and record inconsistencies in Sophia's stories. My phone in my pocket, set to record, I asked innocent questions about her new life. "How's the charity gala planning going?" I asked, passing her the cranberry sauce. "Exhausting," Sophia sighed dramatically. "The committee is so disorganized. I'm basically doing everything myself." Later, when James mentioned being impressed by the committee chair's efficiency, Sophia smoothly pivoted. "Oh yes, Diane is amazing. I was just telling Rachel how she makes everything run so smoothly." Throughout the meal, I documented at least 5 such contradictions, adding them to my growing file. Meanwhile, my relationship with the Hamilton family, particularly James's grandmother Victoria, was developing in unexpected ways. Victoria, a formidable woman in her 80s who had helped build the Hamilton real estate empire alongside her late husband, had taken an interest in me after the wedding incident. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me during a chance meeting at a hospital charity function in November. "Smart enough to see through nonsense, brave enough to stand up to it." Through Victoria, I learned that Sophia had begun manipulating James's family business connections, suggesting certain board members were plotting against him and that his parents were considering selling the company without consulting him. Complete fabrications, Victoria said over tea at her Beacon Hill mansion. But James is starting to believe her. He's canceled 3 family dinners in the past month and questioned his father's decision-making for the first time in his career. With Margaret's help, I quietly worked to protect the Hamilton family business from Sophia's interference, providing Victoria with documentation of similar patterns from Sophia's past. It wasn't about revenge but prevention, stopping the cycle of manipulation before more people were hurt. By early December, I had consulted with Diane Mitchell, an ethical lawyer specializing in cases involving financial impropriety, to understand my options. I was careful to frame our discussions in hypothetical terms at first. If someone had systematically used another person's identity and accounts to commit financial fraud over several years, what would the legal ramifications be? I asked during our first meeting. "That would depend on the amounts involved and whether the victim wanted to press charges," Diane explained. "It could range from civil proceedings to recover the funds to criminal charges of identity theft and fraud. And if the victim wanted justice, but not necessarily criminal prosecution of a family member?" Diane gave me a knowing look. "There are ways to ensure consequences without involving the criminal justice system. A formal demand for restitution, documented evidence shared with appropriate parties, and the threat of legal action are often effective." With Diane's guidance, I developed a 3-phase plan. Phase 1: Professional restoration. This was already underway with my reinstated promotion and the clearing of my professional reputation. Phase 2: Family truth. This would involve a controlled exposure of evidence to key family members, giving them the opportunity to understand the full picture before any public revelations. Phase 3: Protection. This final phase focused on preventing Sophia from harming James's family and business interests, while offering her a path to accountability that didn't necessarily involve legal prosecution. The most difficult decision was what to do about my mother. Despite her wedding revelation, Eleanor had since tried to backtrack, claiming she had been mistaken or confused. She had called me repeatedly, asking me to let things go for the sake of the family. I decided to give her one chance to make amends by confronting her with the evidence I had gathered. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant where I showed her a small sample of the documentation. "This is why you said what you did at the wedding, isn't it?" I asked as she stared at the emails between Sophia and Nathan. "You found out what she was doing." Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she pushed the papers away. "I found some things, yes. But Rachel, this is family business. It should stay private." Private? Sophia deliberately tried to destroy my career, my relationships, my home. She's been stealing from me for years. And now she's doing the same thing to James and his family. She's always needed more attention, more reassurance, Eleanor said defensively. "If you understood her background, what she's been through, I know she's not Dad's biological daughter." I interrupted. "He told me." Eleanor paled. "He had no right. He had every right. Just as I have every right to expose what Sophia has done. Unless you're prepared to help her take responsibility and make amends." My mother's response was disappointing, but not surprising. What good would exposing all this do? It would only tear the family apart. Can't you just keep your distance from her and move on? For my sake. In that moment, I realized Eleanor would never prioritize my well-being over Sophia's or her own comfort. The family dynamic was too entrenched, the dysfunction too normalized. If change was going to happen, it would have to come from outside the system. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, gathering my evidence. "But I can't keep enabling this. What happens next is up to Sophia, not me." As Christmas approached, I made final preparations for the family gathering that would serve as the setting for Phase 2 of my plan. James's family had invited us all to their estate for Christmas dinner. Neutral territory where the truth could finally be revealed. I understood the risks of what I was about to do. Relationships might be permanently altered or ended. But as Dr. Bennett had helped me see, the relationships I thought I had with my sister and mother had never been real to begin with. They had been built on lies, manipulation, and inequality. The night before Christmas Eve, Martha and I sat by her fireplace, watching the flames dance as snow fell gently outside. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her wise eyes studying my face. "I am," I replied with surprising calm. "This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about truth, consequences, and finally breaking free from patterns that have hurt too many people for too long." Martha reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than I was at your age. I saw what Eleanor was doing to you girls, but I didn't intervene forcefully enough. I won't make that mistake again." As I went to bed that night, I felt a strange peace descend. Tomorrow would change everything, but for the first time in my life, I was ready to stand in my truth regardless of the consequences. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect New England winter weather, a fresh blanket of snow covering the landscape, temperatures cold enough to frost the windows, but not so bitter as to make travel dangerous. The Hamilton estate looked like something from a holiday card, with tasteful white lights outlining the colonial architecture and evergreen wreaths adorning each window. I arrived early, having arranged with Victoria to help with final preparations. I wore a simple but elegant emerald green dress, my hair styled in loose waves, a stark contrast to my usual practical ponytail. The Rachel who entered that house was not the same woman who had stood shocked at her sister's wedding 6 months earlier. "You look lovely, dear," Victoria said, greeting me in the grand foyer decorated with a 12-foot Christmas tree. "And remarkably calm, considering." "I've had months to prepare," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought. "No more surprises, just truth." We worked together to arrange the seating for dinner, strategically placing key players where they needed to be. James's father Christopher at one end of the table, Victoria at the other. James and Sophia would sit in the middle of one side, with my parents across from them. Margaret would be next to James, and I would sit beside my father, diagonal from Sophia, close enough to maintain eye contact, but not directly opposite her. As other guests began to arrive, I maintained a pleasant, relaxed demeanor. My father seemed nervous, my mother overly cheerful as she handed out perfectly wrapped gifts. Sophia entered like a queen, wearing a designer red dress with James following a step behind, looking uncomfortable in his holiday sweater. "Rachel," Sophia said, air-kissing my cheek. "Love the dress. TJ Maxx having a sale?" The familiar dig was delivered with a sweet smile. "Vintage, actually," I replied smoothly. "Grandmother's collection." I caught Victoria's approving nod from across the room. Throughout the cocktail hour, I noticed Sophia growing increasingly tense as she observed my easy interactions with the Hamilton family. Margaret and I shared several private conversations, exchanging glances that clearly unsettled my sister. James seemed to notice too, watching us with curious eyes as he nursed a single glass of scotch. Dinner was a masterpiece of holiday tradition. Roast turkey, prime rib, and all the trimmings served on the Hamilton family's antique china. Conversation flowed naturally, though I noticed my mother trying repeatedly to direct attention to Sophia's recent charity work and away from my new promotion. "Rachel, tell everyone about your research grant," Victoria prompted during a lull, effectively countering Eleanor's efforts. Christopher was quite impressed when I mentioned it. As dessert was being served, Martha's famous apple pie alongside Victoria's traditional plum pudding, Victoria tapped her crystal glass gently. "Before we finish our meal, I'd like to suggest we exchange one special gift each tonight, saving the rest for tomorrow. In my family, we always opened one present on Christmas Eve." There were murmurs of agreement, and Victoria's housekeeper wheeled in a cart with a selection of wrapped packages. "I'll start," Victoria said, picking up a medium-sized box wrapped in silver paper. "This is for all of us, really, but Rachel will do the honors of opening it." I felt Sophia's eyes boring into me as Victoria placed the box in my hands. With deliberate calm, I unwrapped it to reveal a sleek laptop. "Thank you, Victoria, but I don't understand," I said, playing my part. "It's not just any laptop, dear. It contains a special presentation. My gift to this family is truth." Victoria's voice was gentle but firm as she addressed the table. "Rachel has prepared something I believe everyone needs to see." I opened the laptop, which was already connected to the dining room's hidden projection system. With a single click, the lights dimmed slightly and a screen descended from a concealed compartment in the ceiling. James looked surprised. Clearly, his grandmother had upgraded her audiovisual system without mentioning it. "What is this?" Sophia demanded, her voice tight. "Just watch," I said, making eye contact with her for the first time that evening. The presentation began with a simple title, "A Pattern of Behavior." What followed was a methodically organized display of evidence, beginning with the earliest documented incidents of Sophia's sabotage and progressing chronologically through the years. I narrated calmly as emails, bank statements, text messages, and recorded conversations appeared on the screen. "This is from 2018, when Sophia first began interfering with my relationship with David Chin. Here she is telling him I was seeing someone else, while simultaneously telling me he had been unfaithful." The family watched in stunned silence as the evidence mounted. My father looked increasingly ill, while my mother's face had gone rigid with denial. James stared at the screen with growing horror, occasionally glancing at his wife, whose expression had transformed from indignation to calculation to barely contained rage. "This section documents the systematic sabotage of my medical career," I continued, showing the correspondence between Sophia and Dr. Farrow. "Thanks to Dr. Patel's intervention, I was able to restore my professional reputation, but the damage could have been permanent." When I reached the evidence of financial theft, showing years of small withdrawals from our shared account adding up to over $30,000, Sophia finally erupted. "This is ridiculous. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're fabricating evidence because you can't stand that I'm happily married and successful." I remained calm. "Each document can be verified independently." The bank statements are real. The emails can be authenticated. I haven't fabricated anything, Sophia. James, we're leaving, Sophia declared, standing abruptly. I won't sit here and be attacked by my disturbed sister on Christmas Eve. But James didn't move. Sit down, Sophia, he said quietly. I want to see the rest. The most damning evidence came last. Documentation of Sophia's recent manipulation of the Hamilton family business. Emails to board members suggesting James's father was considering selling without consulting his son. Messages to James's mother canceling family commitments in his name without his knowledge. Financial inquiries about the structure of the Hamilton Family Trust. As the presentation concluded, there was a moment of complete silence before Victoria spoke. I've conducted my own investigation, she said, her voice steady despite her age. Everything Rachel has presented is consistent with what I found. Sophia has been attempting to create division in our family just as she did in hers. That's not true. Sophia's voice had taken on a desperate edge. Rachel has always been jealous of me. Mom, tell them. All eyes turned to Eleanor, who seemed to shrink in her chair. Sophia has always needed extra attention, she began weakly. Stop it, Eleanor, my father interrupted with unexpected firmness. No more excuses. What happened next stunned everyone. Margaret stood and walked to the laptop, inserting a small flash drive. There's one more piece of evidence you should all hear. The recording that played was a conversation between Sophia and my mother, clearly taken without their knowledge, dated just 2 weeks after the wedding. Sophia's voice filled the room. I can't believe you said that at my wedding. After all these years of helping me, suddenly you grow a conscience. I was upset, Eleanor's recorded voice replied. You promised you'd stop after you married James. But then I found out about the Hamilton Trust inquiries. That's different. James deserves to know what his family is really planning. Besides, Rachel had it coming. She always acts so perfect, so much better than everyone. The hospital board thing was hilarious. Did you see her face when she got passed over for that promotion? Eleanor's recorded sigh was heavy with resignation. Just be more careful. If your father ever found out everything you've done. He's not my real father anyway, so who cares what he thinks? Sophia's laugh was chilling in its callousness. The recording ended, and the room erupted into chaos. Sophia lunged for the laptop, but James caught her arm. Don't, he said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. It's over, Sophia. My mother had buried her face in her hands, while my father sat rigidly upright, his expression a mask of pain and resolve. How long have you known? Sophia demanded, turning to me with hatred in her eyes. About your sabotage? Months. About you not being Dad's biological daughter? Since August. But that's not why I'm doing this. Biology doesn't matter. What you've done does. Victoria stood, her regal bearing commanding attention despite her age. I think it would be best if Sophia left now. Christopher, please have William bring the car around. You can't throw me out. Sophia protested. James, tell them. But James was already removing his wedding ring. I'll be staying with my parents tonight. My lawyer will contact you after the holidays regarding separation proceedings. You can't do this. I'm your wife. A marriage built on lies isn't a marriage at all, James said quietly. I don't know who you really are, but I know I can't spend my life with you. As Sophia was escorted from the room, still protesting her innocence despite the irrefutable evidence, Eleanor attempted to follow. Stay, Eleanor, my father said firmly. We have a lot to discuss as a family. The remainder of the evening was somber but cathartic. James apologized to me for not seeing Sophia's true nature sooner. My father apologized for years of enabling behavior. Victoria thanked me for protecting her family business. Only my mother remained in denial, alternating between defending Sophia and blaming me for exposing family matters publicly. This wasn't done out of vengeance, I explained to the group as we moved to the living room, leaving the evidence displayed on the dining room table. It was about breaking a cycle that has hurt too many people for too long. Martha, who had been quietly observant throughout the evening, finally spoke. Eleanor, You did the same thing to your sister that Sophia did to Rachel. The difference is that Rachel chose to break the pattern rather than perpetuate it. As the night drew to a close, with plans made for further discussions after the holidays, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. The truth was finally out, and while the consequences would continue to unfold, the burden of secrecy had been lifted. I declined Victoria's invitation to stay the night, choosing instead to return to Martha's house. As I prepared to leave, James approached me privately. "Thank you," he said simply. "It would have taken me years to see it on my own, if ever." "I'm sorry it had to happen this way," I replied sincerely. He shook his head. "Don't be. Better 6 months of painful truth than a lifetime of comfortable lies." As I drove through the snowy streets toward Cambridge, I reflected on how differently this Christmas had turned out than any I could have imagined a year ago. The family I had known was irrevocably changed, but perhaps now there was a chance to build something healthier from the ruins. 6 months after that fateful Christmas Eve, summer had returned to Boston, bringing with it new growth and unexpected healing. The early June morning found me in my new office at Boston Memorial Hospital, the nameplate on the door reading Dr. Rachel Harris, head of neurological research. The promotion I had once been denied had been superseded by an even more prestigious position, leading a groundbreaking study on neural regeneration after traumatic brain injuries. The past half-year had brought tremendous change, professionally and personally. My work had flourished without the constant undermining from Sophia. My colleagues, now aware of what had happened, had rallied around me with support and collaboration opportunities. Dr. Patel had become a mentor, guiding my research and encouraging me to publish findings that were now gaining recognition in the medical community. More surprising was my personal life.
Dr.
Michael Brennan, a neurosurgeon who had defended me to the hospital board during the false allegations, had asked me to coffee in January. What started as collegial appreciation had grown into something deeper. At 36, Michael was thoughtful and direct, with none of the game-playing I'd experienced in past relationships. We were taking things slowly, but for the first time in years, I felt secure in a romantic connection. My living situation had changed as well. With my career on solid footing, I had purchased a small Victorian house near Martha's neighborhood in Cambridge. My grandmother, now 83 but still sharp as ever, had decided to sell her larger home and move into my garden apartment, giving us both independence while remaining close enough for daily tea and conversation. The family landscape had shifted dramatically. James's divorce from Sophia had been finalized in record time, expedited by the mountain of evidence and Sophia's increasingly erratic behavior when confronted with the truth. The Hamilton family had protected their business interests, removing Sophia from any positions of influence and conducting a thorough audit to ensure no lasting damage had been done. My father Philip had surprised everyone by finding his voice after decades of acquiescence. He had moved out of the family home in February, renting an apartment downtown while he and Eleanor attempted marriage counseling. Their future remained uncertain, but he had established clear boundaries for the first time in their relationship. Eleanor's journey had been more complicated. Initially, she had doubled down on defending Sophia, accusing me of exaggerating and manipulating evidence. But as more truth came to light, including details of Sophia's derogatory comments about her behind her back, Eleanor had been forced to confront her own role in creating the family dynamic. Our relationship remained strained, limited to occasional lunch meetings where conversations stayed carefully neutral. The most unexpected development had come in April, when I received an email from Sophia. After the Christmas Eve exposure, she had disappeared from Boston, reportedly staying with friends in New York. Her message was brief but shocking. "I've been in therapy for 3 months. My doctor thinks I have narcissistic personality disorder. I don't know if I believe it, but I'm trying. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to try to understand what happened between us." After consultation with Dr. Bennett and careful consideration, I had responded cautiously, open to the possibility of healing but requiring accountability as a prerequisite. We had exchanged a few messages since, each revealing a Sophia I had never known, vulnerable, uncertain, and possibly, for the first time, honest. We had agreed to meet in person the following week, with our therapists present, to begin what would undoubtedly be a long and difficult conversation about our shared past and whether any form of relationship was possible in the future. Family therapy had also begun, revealing the roots of dysfunction that stretched back generations. Our maternal grandmother, it turned out, had played favorites with her daughters, just as Eleanor had with us, creating a pattern of competition and resentment that had poisoned both generations. Eleanor was slowly, painfully beginning to acknowledge her role and the damage it had caused. On a warm Sunday evening in June, I hosted a small dinner gathering in my new home. The table on my back patio was set for 6: Martha, Margaret, who had become a close friend, Michael, Dr. Patel, and his wife Nina, and me. These people represented my chosen family, the supportive connections I had built while freeing myself from toxic dynamics. As we enjoyed dessert and coffee under string lights in the gathering dusk, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. The conversation quieted as my guests turned attentive faces toward me. To the daughter who learned that family is defined by love and truth, not blood and secrets. Martha's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she recognized the words, a reclaiming of my mother's wedding toast that had started this entire journey. The following morning, I received a notification about Sophia's upcoming court appearance for financial restitution related to the funds she had taken from our shared account. My lawyer had advised me to attend, but after careful consideration, I declined. My presence wasn't necessary for justice to be served, and my energy was better spent building my new life than revisiting the pain of the past. As I closed my laptop and prepared for my day at the hospital, I thought about the generations of women in my family who had been trapped in cycles of favoritism, competition, and resentment. For perhaps the first time in our family history, that cycle had been broken. The cost had been high, relationships damaged or lost, painful truths exposed, but the freedom on the other side was worth it. True revenge, I had come to understand, wasn't about exposing Sophia or seeing her punished. It was about freeing myself from toxic dynamics and creating a life defined by authentic connections rather than manipulation and deceit. The ultimate victory wasn't winning against my sister, but refusing to play a game that had no real winners, only varying degrees of loss. As summer bloomed in Boston, so too did my conviction that the future would be different from the past. The journey of healing had only begun, for me and for my family, but for the first time, we were walking in the light of truth rather than the shadows of secrets. I know many of you watching have experienced family betrayal or discovered painful truths about those you trusted most. Your comments on my previous videos have shown me how universal these struggles can be. If my story has resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel where I'll be sharing more about my ongoing journey toward healing and building healthy relationships after family trauma. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? What helped you move forward after a betrayal? Your experiences might help someone else who's walking a similar path right now. Thank you for witnessing my story. Remember that breaking toxic family cycles isn't selfish. It's an act of courage that can heal generations to come. If you found value in this video, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. Until next time, this is Rachel, wishing you truth, healing, and the courage to create the family you deserve, whether born or chosen.